In a wealthy suburb of Rochester, New York, a husband, father of two, and founder CEO of a small but successful tech company was found shot to death in his home. His wife and youngest son were on scene when the police arrived, and they had a story. One that was intended to keep them both out of prison. The only problem with their story was that the crime scene told a very different one. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin and this is Just Thought Lounge. JTL is the true crime channel that delivers serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. We're about to take a look at the unusual case of Charlie Tan. Nothing in this case seems to check the regular boxes. A small community rocked by a tragedy, but it was the accused, not the victim, that was well loved by friends, family, and the broader community. The trial held surprises, the jury was divided, the judge showed his bias, and when all was said and done, justice in this case, if you agree with the outcome, came from an unexpected turn of events. Let's take a look. Pittsford is a suburb of Rochester in New York State. The large houses are homes to business leaders, doctors, lawyers, and other professionals and their families. The neighborhood is known to be a quiet and safe one. The Tan family, Jim and Jean, had moved to Pittsford from Canada when their two boys, Jeff and Charlie, were still young. The parents, who had originally emigrated from China, found themselves living a sort of American dream, at least on the surface. Jim had founded and continued to run a successful business, Dynamax Imaging, a medical imaging equipment and software company. By 2015, their eldest son, Jeff, had moved out of the family home to attend college and lived in Colorado. 19-year-old Charlie had done the same. The former high school class president, football player, and academic had found his place in the Ivy League. Charlie was in his fourth semester at Cornell. He was part of a fraternity and played on the sprint football team. In early 2015, everything seemed to be going well for the popular sophomore. No one close to Charlie at Cornell, nor close friends back home in Pittsford, would have predicted what was about to take place. Charlie, however, seemed to know exactly what was coming. On the evening of February 9th, 2015, Jean Tan placed a call from the family home to 911.
911 center, what is the address of the emergency?
Yes. Hi. This is Jean Tan. I heard an argument that someone talked to my husband.
Ma'am, I can't understand anything you're saying. Does anyone need an ambulance? Did you say you heard a shot?
Yeah.
Does somebody in the house have a gun?
Yeah.
Who's already dead? You're who?
The husband.
Are you in a safe spot?
Yes, I am.
We need you to wait outside of the house for the police officer's safety.
When responding officers arrived at the Tan house, they found Jean Tan and Charlie waiting for them outside of the house, as instructed by the emergency call operator. Inside, on the upper level of the house, in the home office, Jim Tan was found dead on the floor. He had suffered 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest and 1 to the head. It appeared that he had been seated at his desk when the shots were fired. The first from the hallway, then the following 2 at closer range. Spent shell casings were found on the floor near the doorway. There had been no attempt to clean these up or dispose of them. Jean's explanation of the incident provided to the 911 operator seemed a bit confused. Responders inferred that Charlie and Jim had been arguing, that Jean had only just heard the shots fired.
Her son or husband arguing, the caller heard shots. Said someone in the house has a gun. Saying her son shot her husband, caller is hysterical. She's saying that the son was trying to protect himself.
When officers arrived, Jean clearly stated that her son had fired the shots. She also insisted that he had done so to protect her. Charlie echoed his mother's story. He had no choice but to fire on his father. Charlie then led the officers to a shotgun left in the garage.
Are either of them suspects at this point?
Well, obviously that we're talking to them because we believe that they may have some involvement in this. We just don't know the circumstances surrounding it yet. Search warrants are being written for the residents.
Jean and Charlie were taken to the station for further questioning. Aside from their initial statements made on the call to 911 and when officers first arrived on scene, neither offered any details about what had transpired. Once at the station, Charlie's lawyer was immediately present, and he and his mother stopped talking. When Jean Tan was brought into the police station under suspicion for her husband's death, detectives found a few telling items on her person. First, in Jean's pocket, was an appointment card for an upcoming court date. She had reported her husband to law enforcement, a fact that supported her and her son's stated fears over Jim's abusive behavior. However, also in her pocket was a list of names of local, prominent criminal defense attorneys, alongside their contact information. Business cards were likewise found inside of her purse. Jean had come to the station prepared. And this was not the only indication that Jim's death may not have come about in the way that Jean had described to the 911 operator. After a search warrant for the house was obtained, new passport photos for both Charlie and Jean were found inside. Had Charlie and his mother been planning a trip out of the country? Open on Jim's computer at his work desk were his emails. Despite being in the middle of correspondence with multiple employees and business associates, investigators found that Jim had not replied to anything written to him for days. There was also one glaringly obvious detail noted by responding officers. There was dried blood throughout the scene. Counter to the statements made by Jean Tan on the 911 call, the incident that led to her husband's death could not have just occurred. In further support of this, there was also a distinct odor. There was little doubt that Jim Tan had been dead for days. Approximately 4 full days, in fact. Before Jean placed the call to 911 on the 9th of February, Charlie sent an email to his fraternity brothers. The email contained a warning. Something was coming. Expect law enforcement to be in touch with them. They would have questions about Charlie. He titled the email Showtime. Before leaving, he also visited his football coach, who doubled as a student counselor. Charlie, who never cried, broke down in tears with his coach, who offered to help him in any way that he could. But there was nothing that the coach could do, Charlie said. That evening, a Thursday night, he had dinner with a friend, Jacob Grossman. Jacob reported that Charlie was not his regular, lighthearted, and carefree self. He was visibly distressed and upset. Charlie had told Jacob that he would need to leave the country, but offered no further details as to why this was necessary. Another friend of Charlie's who spoke with him that evening was also concerned about what he might do. A call was placed to police to perform a wellness check on his home.
He didn't give us a lot of details. I'm just worried that he might do something at his house. I don't know if anything's going to happen, but I just can't take a chance.
All right, well, I'm going to have him go to that house and check on him.
Deputy Steve Williams arrived at the Tan household that Thursday evening in time to catch Charlie and his mother leaving the house. The deputy would later recall that Charlie explained that his friend was overreacting. He had been upset earlier in the evening, but was working through his problems. Charlie came across as calm, articulate, not upset, and not distraught in any way. 4 days later, Steve Williams and others would come to a horrific realization. Jim Tan was almost certainly lying dead in the upstairs office when he attended the property. He must have encountered Charlie at the house only hours, perhaps minutes, after the son had killed his father. Charlie was arrested for the murder of his father and initially held in police custody while a formal indictment was sought. The story of self-defense was clearly false. Jean and Charlie were lying. The only question left by the physical evidence was whether Charlie had in fact pulled the trigger. Was it not just as likely that Jean committed the murder and her son was now covering for her? Investigators believed that the evidence pointed to the son. Shell casings found in the office doorway had Charlie's fingerprints. Notably, the shotgun did not. But there was also no sign of a struggle, only a case forming of a subsequent cover-up. This was not a justifiable homicide.
The grand jury of Monroe County has voted an indictment against Charles Tan linked to the allegations contained in the felony complaint for which he was arraigned on Tuesday.
No surprise that he's been indicted on something. That certainly doesn't surprise us. I think what is surprising is the crowd that you see here today, and that really speaks to the character of my client and who he is and what he's done with his life.
News of Charlie's arrest and indictment sent shockwaves across the Pittsford community. It was difficult for many of those who had known Charlie for years to comprehend that he could be capable of murder.
I heard this morning that it was Charlie. That's when I got emotional, because that's who we know, my kids know, and know of, being this sweet person who wouldn't hurt who wouldn't hurt anyone. Very popular, well-liked. Everyone liked him.
A GoFundMe page launched by one of Charlie's closest high school friends raised $50,000 for his defense from families across the community. If Charlie Tan had killed his father, he must have had no other choice. This sentiment was further reinforced as the history of the Tan family conflicts came to light.
It's crazy to think about how he was going through that at home, and yet to everybody else, he was the kindest, sweetest person ever. It shows just how much he actually meant to the community and how much everybody respects him and believes in him.
The 911 call placed on the 9th of February was not the first one made by Jean Tan. In fact, emergency calls from the Tan household had been made 18 times over the span of just over a decade that the Tans had lived in Pittsford. It has been assumed that most of these calls were made by Jean or her sons about Jim's alleged abuse. However, reports show a murkier picture. Most of the calls were initiated by Jim Tan, calling law enforcement with complaints about his eldest son, Jeff, or his wife. In one call, Jim Tan alleged that his wife attacked him after an argument and scratched him. In another, Jim suspected Jeff had put something in his food to make him ill. But the last call before Jim's death, placed just 10 days prior, was Jean seeking help to keep her safe from her husband.
911 Center, what's the address of emergency?
Yes, hi, my name is Jean Tan, and my husband, I need your protection. I'm so scared. Please, help.
Okay.
All right, so there's no issue here. Just my wife and myself have some arguments.
On the 4th of February, the day before Charlie left Cornell and returned home for what he had dubbed showtime, he had a phone call with his mother. On that call, Jean told her son that the situation at home was getting worse. She told him once again that she believed the next time Jim was going to kill her. Charlie told her to lay low, stay in her room with the door locked, and to not do anything that might piss off his father. Calls for help over the years had led only to Jim being forced to leave the family home for a few days at a time. Upon his father's return, the cycle reset. That is, until the 5th of February, the day Charlie came home. It was the end of the line. He was going to break the cycle before his mother ended up dead. Charlie pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. As the trial approached, Charlie's lawyers advised that he not admit to the shooting. They successfully argued that his statements to deputies at the scene, the statements admitting that he had shot his father but that he had to, be suppressed. There would be no confession presented at trial when it commenced less than a year later. He was released on bond for the duration. The prosecution did not view the violence in the Tan household as a justification for murder. Rather, Jean's many calls for help and the escalating situation inside the home leading up to Charlie's return from Cornell was what gave the teenager a motive for murder.
But our theory is that information was conveyed to him about something that would make him want to kill his father.
In addition to motive, the state could prove that Charlie may have planned the murder in advance and had sought to flee in the days following.
He planning to leave the country? Did he leave the country?
Don't know the answers to those. You'll have to wait and hear what comes out at the trial.
The shotgun was tracked to a purchase made at a Walmart near to Cornell on the day of the murder. Video surveillance footage showed Charlie in the store attempting to purchase the weapon. The store would not allow him to buy the gun that day. Charlie did not have American citizenship. As a Canadian, Charlie needed to be placed on a wait list for the weapon. Evidently, Charlie did not have time to wait. Undeterred, Charlie sought out a friend of his from the university, claiming that he was planning a camping and hunting trip that weekend. Could his friend buy the gun for him? It took several hours, but Charlie acquired the shotgun. The court heard from the deputy who had attended the Tan home on the evening of the murder. The jury also heard from Jacob, who had placed the call for a welfare check. After leaving the house that night, Charlie and his mother drove to the Canadian border. From Toronto, they applied for Chinese travel visas and purchased one-way tickets to Shanghai. Within a few days, they had the visas processed and collected. But over the weekend, while they waited, Charlie began to reconsider his plans. He would be leaving his brother Jeff alone in the United States. He also believed he would be placing his mother under suspicion for the murder. Instead of catching the flight to China, they drove back to the house, staged the 911 call, and called a lawyer. The state knew that Charlie had fled, and they suspected he had planned a flight out of the country, but the jury at Charlie's trial would not hear all of these details. Prosecutor William Gargan had found himself on the wrong side of Judge James Piampiano on more than one occasion throughout the trial. He was scolded again after an arguably theatrical performance in closing arguments, in which he used the murder weapon as a powerful prop to present his argument. The state argued against the sympathetic depiction of a son and mother left with no other choice. There was no sign of a provoked attack or anything resembling a life and death struggle at the scene of the killing. Jim had been in the presumed safety of his own home, then shot 3 times by his son. When it came time for the defense to present their closing argument, they made a risky move. His defense pointed the finger at Gene Tan as the shooter. Yes, Charlie's fingerprints were on the shell casings. Charlie had purchased the shotgun. Was it not possible that he did so for his mother's protection, loaded the gun for her, but was not the one who pulled the trigger? There was no evidence, they argued, to prove that Charlie was the shooter. Gene had motive as well, arguably a stronger one. Numerous friends had supported Charlie throughout the trial. Each testified to the stellar person that he was. Charlie would have protected his mother. Perhaps he was protecting her now by taking the blame.
Homicide occurred. We know that. Frankly, an intentional homicide occurred. We know that. We said that during our closing argument. But there was reasonable doubt relative to Charlie Tan being the person that did that.
The jury's deliberations lasted for days and days. The jury was split. 8 members were in favor of a conviction, 4 voted for an acquittal. They were not, however, technically deadlocked. According to some, discussions were ongoing and they wished to push on. Judge Piampiano had seen enough. As deliberations stretched into a second week and the jurors reported being exhausted, the judge stepped in and declared a mistrial.
We're very passionate with our conviction of how we felt one way or another.
There's a piece of American cheese, there's a piece of Swiss cheese. Swiss cheese has got some holes. Some of us could get to those holes and fill them, some of us couldn't.
The Subaru at the airport, and there was mention of Border Patrol, and the car had gone over to Canada sometime that weekend after the crime occurred, and nobody ever testified to whose car it was. Nobody testified to who drove that car, the dates it was out of the country.
Willing to work this morning. He told us to go back in, start over, and we were willing to do that. We came back this morning all ready to start, and we thought we were going to come to one. And unfortunately, we were a little surprised by the mistrial.
It does kind of makes you feel as though justice wasn't served. because we didn't get that chance to actually come up with a unanimous verdict.
I had no words. I was in total shock that he would decide that. And in my heart, I didn't feel that justice was served at all.
Disappointed at all, Brian?
Of course we are. We came into this expecting to win, frankly. Anybody that comes into a trial and is satisfied by a hung jury is crazy. So we're disappointed.
It's not a question of disappointment. It's a question of people's recommendation. The court has the full discretion as to how he is going to assess that. It's also an unusual case, so the court is looking at unusual factors.
Roughly a month had passed when the parties were back in court for a hearing to determine the next steps. The state was determined to retry the case against Charlie Tan. With the defense's surprise tactics having been revealed, they were confident of their success the second time around. Judge Piampiano had not yet ruled on the defense motion to dismiss the charges. The motion was filed as a matter of common practice, forcing the judge to review the evidence available in the case and whether it was sufficient to proceed. When Judge Piampiano ruled on the motion, he began speaking to the weakness of the state's case. State prosecutor Bill Gargan, again caught off guard by the turn of events, requested to be heard on the issue and was denied. The prosecutor proceeded to accuse the judge of suffering from a form of amnesia that caused him to forget and therefore dismiss the wealth of evidence against Charlie Tan. To this, the judge threatened to place the prosecutor in handcuffs and usher him from the court.
And I was more than willing to have handcuffs placed on me to argue my point.
He ruled to dismiss the case against Charlie outright, a ruling that all but ensured Charlie could not be retried for the murder.
There is no potential for changing what occurred.
Why don't you explain why you don't think there should be another trial?
Sure. Very simple. Despite the people's efforts to couch this any differently, this is a trial order of dismissal before the rendition of a verdict.
I'm talking about everyday language. Why should there not be another trial?
There shouldn't be another trial because it's not allowed under the law.
2 days before Judge Piampiano made his shocking decision to dismiss the charges against Charlie, he had won an election to a Supreme Court seat. The timing called into question Piampiano's judgment.
Back up.
Sorry.
Please, calm down. Let's go over here.
Okay.
Calm down.
He had left jurors to deliberate for over 50 hours on a case he later determined had no merit.
I don't think it says a lot of good things about the justice system, only because it was set to be a trial by jury, and in the end it was basically a trial by judge's decision, and I don't think that's the way things are supposed to go. I think Mr. Tan deserved another trial. Yes. Not Charlie, Jim.
Charlie Tan moved on with his life. He was forced to withdraw from Cornell after the arrest, but he planned to continue his education. Charlie applied to 24 different colleges following the dismissal of the charges against him, and eventually one of them, Chicago State University, offered him an acceptance. In Chicago, Charlie volunteered with a youth mentoring program. He had his 1-year-old German Shepherd certified with the nonprofit Therapy Dogs International. He worked with local adolescents in his community and dreamed of setting up an after-school program to promote academics and sports programs in his new neighborhood. It seemed that Charlie Tan was getting back to being the person everyone knew him to be before his father's murder. But there was a dark cloud hanging over his head. During this time, an appellate court ruled that then State Supreme Court Justice James Piampiano's decision to dismiss the case was wrong and legally unsound. But the murder charge could not be reinstated. The decision stated that it could not reverse the dismissal, though the court did decide that there was sufficient evidence for the prosecution. And state prosecutors in New York had not forgotten about Charlie Tan. Lying during the purchase of a firearm in order to skirt regulations and acquire one is a federal offense. Similarly, receiving a firearm with the intent to commit a criminal offense, such as shooting your own father, is a serious federal crime. Charlie's old friend, Whitney Knickerbocker, was approached by state prosecutors. He was informed of the repercussions he faced for having purchased the gun for Charlie. Whitney started talking. He admitted to his role in the purchase, an illegal one, and in exchange was off the hook for any wrongdoing. Charlie Tan, however, was facing multiple federal gun charges. Initially, federal officials were unaware of Charlie's location. He had moved back to Canada. So they issued a warrant for his arrest. Shortly after, he was arrested at the Canadian-US border as he traveled back to the United States to attend a friend's wedding.
Had anybody wanted to reach out to me, had anybody wanted to reach out to James Nobles and tell us, we would have turned him in. He would have turned himself in. I was notified by the news. We had no notice. My partner James actually sent me a text last night. A member of the media had reached out asking for a comment. We knew nothing about it. And then obviously confirmed that it was in fact the case. But to say that I'm shocked is an understatement.
The judge did was wrong. So what we did next was just cooperate with the federal prosecutors who next had the case.
While waiting in custody, Charlie pleaded guilty to the charges. He apologized to the judge in a court hearing and accepted responsibility for his actions in acquiring the shotgun. His defense team requested a sentence of 5 years, while the prosecution pushed for close to the maximum, 25 years. Before sentencing Charlie, Judge Frederick Scullin said the evidence was overwhelmingly of a premeditated purchase of the shotgun and of premeditated murder. He called Charlie an extremely disturbed individual. Then he sentenced the 23-year-old to a 20-year term in federal prison.
Charles Tan went to great lengths to acquire a shotgun unlawfully with lies about the actual purchaser and intended use. He planned to leave school and flee the country, and he found his father working at his computer behind a desk in his slippers and gunned him down with one shot from the hallway and two at close range, the last one to his face and instantly lethal.
The actions that he went through, loading the gun, firing the gun, you have to discharge the shell casing to get the next round in, and he did that 3 times, closer and closer range. It shows premeditation beyond any doubt. He still has not come out publicly and said, I pulled the trigger. He's gotten all the way up to that point at his plea and in his sentencing submissions, but he will never and has never said what happened in that hallway and in that room that night. When the evidence is clear, and there's no reason for him to not say it at this point, he cannot be retried for murder.
There was no threat of a further prison sentence being imposed should Charlie confess to the murder of his father, but he had not done so yet. In his 2019 bid to have his sentence reduced, Charlie Tan, for the first time, confessed to the killing. The request for a reduced sentence contended that there was excessive proof that Jim Tan was abusive and a threat to his wife, Jean. In a letter to the judge, Charlie wrote, "All I knew was that my mother was unusually defeated and repeatedly told me that he was going to kill her. I felt like there was no other option, that I had to protect her. Rather than digest the situation and any other possible alternatives, I acted on impulse, leading to my series of immature and irrational decisions. I entered my parents' home through the back door, walked upstairs, turned into my father's office, and shot my father 3 times as he was sitting at his desk. I knew I had killed him." Charlie's appeal for a reduction in his sentence was denied. Back in 2015, as the state and defense teams prepared for trial, Charlie was approached with a plea deal. If he pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter, he would serve an 8-year sentence. That would, of course, set him up for release in 2023. Charlie is currently serving his 20-year sentence at the medium-security Ray Brook Federal Prison near Lake Placid, New York.
He was a good boy. He still is a good boy. He just did a bad thing. He's doing the right thing now.
And that was the unusual case of Charlie Tan, Thanks for watching. I'm Kevin. This is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.